Hello, it's Ian here with Geoff McCoy. We're just going to talk about a few different models, the names of the models, and the reasons why Geoff came up with them. And we're going to check out a bit of history. So, Geoff, the first model basically was the double ender.
Yeah, that was done in 1967 when I worked for Barry Bennett. And it turned out I was in the Narrabeen Board Riders at the time, and everybody in the Narrabeen Board Riders Club had a Barry Bennett double ender that I'd shape. So they were the first board that, in my opinion, that I actually designed and made. They were really popular for a long time.
And what was the sizes?
Quite short, really, anywhere from 4'6", which at the time Grant Oliver rode, up to about 6'6". That was, most of them were around 6 foot.
And they were like the first short boards after the...
Well, you know, there's talk that MacTavish made the first shortboard, but if you speak in terms of from like 9 foot plus, he brought them down to 8 foot. But these were the first boards that were made under 8 feet that people rode. So yeah, they were in that sense they were the first short boards.
Excellent. And then the next one was the Chisel Tail Phase 1, 1970.
Yeah, well, that's a bit of a story actually. At that time, they started making what they call pop-out surfboards, and it put a shockwave through the whole industry. So they organised a manufacturers meeting at Barry Bennett's in his showroom in Brookvale. So all the manufacturers went, and I went, and they were all talking about how scary it was, but these pop-outs were going to take over. And I got up and said, well, I'm not really that convinced that they'll take over. I don't think it's a worry. And a guy says, you've only been in the business 5 minutes and you don't know anything. So I just sat down, and then I was at the back of the showroom, and there was a pile of magazines there. And they were, because Barry Bennett back then distributed Surfing magazine in Australia. So I got one and I started looking through it, found this photo of a guy called, anyway, he had this twin fin surfboard which was the same shape, plan shape as the Chisel Tail. And so while I was there with Bruce Channon, who at the time was the laminator for McCoy, and I showed him, and I said, I'm going to go around and shape one now, which was about 9 o'clock at night. So I did, I went around and shaped one, and he ended up laminating it in the middle of the night. And we had it good enough. It didn't get finished, it just got sand finish, and that was it. And we put the fins on, and we put the fins on parallel to the stringer and at 90 degrees to the board. So then we gave it to a guy to test out at DY Point, and he couldn't turn it. And we couldn't work out why. And then somewhere after about a few days, someone said, no, you got to turn the fins in towards the stringer, pointing at the nose. So we took the fins off and reset them and did that, and it improved it, but they were still at 90 degrees. And then somehow or other we discovered that the fins needed to be splayed out, and not at 90, they needed to be about between 3 and 5 degrees of an angle to the bottom. And we did that. This all took about a week, and then we had the twin fins, that they actually work. So yeah, that was a bit of that was early days.
But they were very popular.
Yeah, a lot of people rode Chisel Tails. Actually, Mark Richards, who started riding my boards around, he started on double enders when he was about 9. That was his first twin fin, was the Chisel Tail. And after a while, they were really short, like under 6 foot usually, short and very thick, and the thickness carried right through in the tail, and that's why they got their Chisel Tail. It just chamfered the back of the board off and kept the thickness. And they used to skim along and really quick and easy to manoeuvre. So after a while, we thought, you know, then you can't ride a decent sized wave on one of these things, they're just too loose. So I made the second
Phase 2?
Phase 2 of the twin fins, and that was like a full pointy nose and with a wide point forward of halfway, which was quite similar at that time to the average board, where the wide point was forward of halfway, a full pointy nose, and tapered into the tail. So I made, and then those Phase 2 models were like over 6 foot and over. And then I made one for myself and Tony Hardwick, and then we came up to Lennox surfing, and Mark Richards was a grommet, and he came with us. He was riding about a 4'10" Chisel Tail, and we got Lennox on pretty solid, and everybody was looking at us carrying these boards out and laughing, but we soon quietened them down. They went off. They went really good. So they were all coming up after we'd come in, going, give us a look, what are they, what are they? And anyway, MR was riding this Chisel Tail even in the bigger waves. But that was his first twin fin.
And then you also are making the classic pintail. It says 1973.
Yeah, well, that's right. They were around forever. They've been, I don't know who even invented them in the first place, but so everybody made their version of a classic pintail, and they were quite popular too. But because you could extend the length more and you could make them a bit bigger, so they could ride bigger waves. And then after years, I still make them now, but they've evolved into what I call the Dreamtime, and it's because they've been around so long. Like, if you have a look at the stuff that the modern names I've given the boards, they're all Australian sort of slang. So the Dreamtime is Aboriginal for a long time ago, eh?
Yeah.
So that's why they evolved into the Dreamtime. And I've made changes to them anyway. I still make them today. Actually, a couple of good surfers ride them, like James Llewellyn.
Yeah.
He rides them all the time.
Yeah, he goes to Bali and
yeah, he rides them in all sorts of ways.
So that's the Dreamtime, and then we got the Laser Zap Phase 1. It says.
Well, the Laser Zap was probably the most publicised, criticised board I ever did.
You still get plenty of orders for them?
Huh?
You still get plenty of orders for them?
Yeah, well, I reckon 30% of the boards I make now are Laser Zaps, and the price is really high. They've become iconic. So I guess a lot of people that disagreed with it and are sort of eating humble pie now, because nearly everybody that gets one says they're unreal. It's the best board I've ever had. It's a combination. When you look back, it's a thick modern board with a wide back, and in the early days I started out with wide tails that were only like 15.5 inches, and because at that stage everybody said wide tails would spin out, so I used to have 3 flyers to reduce the width in the tail, 15, 10 and 5 inches up from the tail, and they just reduced, and then a swallowtail. And then when you did a bottom turn on a decent wave, you could feel the board go clunk, 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 clunk was the reduction on the rail. And I thought maybe they'd be all right, and there wasn't any suggestion that they were going to slide out. So I decided to take the 15-inch flyer out and just replace it with a 12 and a 6-inch. And then that worked even better. So then I went, well, I might as well try just a 6-inch reduction. Tried that, worked even better again. Then I said, well, might as well have a go at nothing. So
how wide's the tail?
the tails were only, at this stage, real early days, they were only about 15.5 inches wide, which was a big increase from 13.5.
Most boards.
Back what most boards were. Anyway, when I had put the straight outline and the round back on it, it went even better. It was smooth, flowing, had a lot of speed, and so then I went into experimenting with a wider tail, and I blew them out to like 17 inches, which was outrageous really at that stage.
For a short board?
Yeah, they were only short, and that's when the criticism came in, and well, Shane was riding them mainly, and he was absolutely ripping on them, head and shoulders above anyone in that period, in my opinion, and the people just kept writing it off because it was so different. I don't think they could get their head around it.
But it was all about standing in one spot, not moving, having to shuffle up and back.
Yeah, it was, because Shane used to say, when we had the wide point forward and a full pointy nose and a narrow back, the volume in the board was in the middle to slightly forward. So if you stood on the back and did a turn, you needed to step forward to get it up into trim to go.
Yeah.
And he used to say, if I didn't have to step forward, I could get another manoeuvre in. So that gave us the idea to pull the area back into the tail more. And then that's as I just said, that they went out to 17, and they went unreal.
And how tall? Like 6 feet? Or?
Well, anywhere from 5'6" to 6'6", still in that short sort of board range.
Yeah. And the thickness?
Thickness was at least 3 inches.
And thick in the tail as well.
Relatively thick. They weren't as thick as the Chisel Tail, but they did hold thickness through into the tail, because we'd increased the tail area. That gave more buoyancy anyway, so they didn't need to have the big thick tail like the Chisel Tail. And then they went really good, and Shane rode them, won a lot of contests riding them and stuff, even though they didn't work.
But you can move the fin forward and back as well?
Yeah, they always had boxes.
So you could ride bigger waves, smaller waves?
Well, you could ride waves up to 6 foot, solid 6 foot. And then, because that worked all right, well, the next step was, when we called them, they were the Phase 1 Astronaut Zots. They were even wider in the tail. They went from like 17 to 19, and they were really full on. It still had the narrow no nose, but you just stood on the back and in one position. You didn't have to move, do anything. That was pretty extreme.
I just showed the modern Astron Zot with the wider nose. This one.
That was oh yeah, well no, they actually, hang on, I'll get a photo of it.
So this picture, it says lasers out, but it's actually the Astronaut Zot Phase 1.
That's correct.
And you only make them in single fins?
Yeah, that all Astronaut Zots, even the modified version now, is still only single fin.
And it's fuller nose and fuller tail.
Yeah. They're more balanced.
For all round beach breaks or everywhere?
Yeah, no, they're for all waves. Yeah, they're all rounders.
All rounders, yeah.
Yeah.
And you're selling heaps of those too?
Sell quite a few of them. Yeah. I've just done a replica of the Extreme. I did two for a guy who wants to get them and put them on the wall, and I was doing them, and I thought, well, I think I'll do one and make a stocky out of it.
Right.
And get this really good spray that's going to be on it and stuff, and put $3,500 on it.
And that'll be a one-off sort of thing.
Like it is. At this point, there's only one.
So I grew up in Maroubra and saw Larry Blair riding these at Southend, doing incredible things in the barrel. It's a dream time with the swallow.
Yeah, that's right. That's all that is a dream time with a swallowtail.
I think it's got a couple of flyers on it as well.
Yeah.
Is that what he's riding at Pipeline when he won?
No.
No? Was he?
He was riding like guns.
What? Dream times?
No, they're just guns.
What tail?
A round tail.
Round tail.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think they're something like 7, 9 and 8 foot 2 or something like that. It's interesting that you mention that, because at the last Pipe Masters, I got told about it. Barton Lynch was co-commentating with some American guy, and the American guy asked Barton what was the highlight in his mind of the Pipe Masters, and he said when Larry Blair won back-to-back riding McCoy shaped boards. Wow. And the guy changed the subject straight away. I really hurt people, eh?
So now we got the Nugget, the AllRound Nugget.
Yeah.
Was that 93?
Yeah, that was the first one of those I made for myself. At that particular time, surfboard design was, in my opinion, and still is, off the rails big time. People were trying to ride ridiculously narrow, thin, hard to surf stuff, and I was trying to ride it too, and I got really frustrated with it, and I thought I was actually going to quit shaping, and I said to my sister about it. I said, I'm going to give it up, it's ridiculous. And she said, well, what would you ride if you had a choice? And I said, I'm not even interested in trying to think about it, I'm just going to give it up, I'm done. Anyway, she said, no, make a board that you think will work. So I did, ended up making the first AllRound Nugget, which was 20.5 wide, about 3 inches thick, with a 16.5 inch tail. And I started riding it when I was surfing at Broken Head all the time.
Yeah, I got photos of it.
And then eventually people were saying, what do you got? What's that? That looks like it's going all right. And so that was sort of how...
And the nose, what?
The nose was about 14 inches wide. And it was elliptical. So what I actually...
It was different in the double ender. The double ender's the same.
Yeah, well, because of my experience with a really wide back board and a narrow nose, the double ender came back into my mind, and I thought, well, why do a double ender again? I know that a wider tail works better. So I took, instead of making it 20 in the middle, 15 tail and 15 nose, I went, okay, I'll make it 20 in the middle, 16 in the tail and 14 in the nose. So it's an out of balance ellipse.
Yeah.
When it just started going really good. So that was the start of the Nugget range. And then that was the all-rounder. It still is.
One of your most popular boards.
Yeah, it is, even to this day. The potbelly came later. The difference between a potbelly and a all-round nugget was the potbelly was wider in the nose, in the plan shape, and flatter in the rocker. That was for sort of weak waves with flat, not much, face on them and stuff, because they'd plane a lot easier. So that was a version of the all-rounder. Then the Stumpy went sort of back towards the original Astronaut. The Stumpy was 17 1/4 in the tail with a 13-inch nose, so it was a big wide tail with a narrower nose, and only about 19 1/4, 19 1/2 wide. But they work really well, but you had to be heavy back-footed surfer to get the best out of them, because if you put your weight forward, there wasn't much restriction there, so you just sort of sink the front. And that's what the potbelly was good for. If you were an evenly balanced surfer, you didn't have, then you put a bit of pressure on your front foot. The wider, flatter rocker handled that better than a board with more rocker and a narrower nose, because it had more resistance under the nose. So that's how they all came in for a reason.
Slight variations for different waves, different people.
Actually, if you cut most of my models in half at the halfway point, the back's been consistent throughout all of them. It's the nose area and rockers that change the most. But the tail areas and tail lift have been pretty consistent. I don't do many of them anymore.
Then we got the big Guy Nugget.
Well, the big Guy Nugget was, as it says, big guys. It's a bigger version of the all-rounder, and it was. I don't think they started until they were 7'2" long, and they went up to 8'4". They were for bigger, heavier guys that wanted to keep on surfing reasonably, carving and be loose, and they work really good. I still make them, but I've changed the name of the big Guy Nugget a lot of the time. I just call them all-round nuggets now, because if females don't really want to ride a big Guy Nugget, but they can get the same thing in an all-rounder and they're more comfortable with it. But they're pretty much the same board.
And parallel rails and so on.
Yeah, the plant shape is more evenly balanced, but they had 17-inch tails and maybe 15-inch noses.
We've got guys 15 stone, like 6'5".
Yeah, 100 kgs and more.
Yeah.
I still make a lot of them.
Now we get the traditional style Malibu. Is that what you call it? Or
yeah, that's just my version of an all-round mal. I call them all-round mals. What people don't realise is, for the first 2 or 3 years of my involvement in the surfboard industry, all I shaped was Malibus.
With Barry Bennett?
Well, I started at Ron Surfboards and then moved to Barry Bennett. And even at Bennett's, the regular board at the beginning was a 9-footer or more. And then the MacTavish thing kicked in and they brought them down to 8 foot. And they had big V-tails, they were beasts of boards. But they took them to Hawaii and left them in a garbage dump, I think, because they just didn't, they were all wrong, which I didn't realise at the time because I didn't understand it enough, well, nobody else did either. But there were too many hard edges, too many flats.
What I notice is a lot of MacTavishes and other longboards have a very big kick in the tail, but yours doesn't. Why is that?
Well, the kick in the tail makes them easy to manoeuvre, but you don't get drive. on another story regarding tail rocker, when I was in California years ago now, I made Shane a quiver of big guns for Hawaii. And one of them was 11 foot for Waimea, and a 10 foot 6 and 10 foot and a 9 foot 6. Anyway, I just used standard Clark blanks with the rocker that they provided. Anyway, I sent him over to Hawaii because I was in California. Shane started riding them, and he rode the big one at Waimea, and he sent a photo of himself. It's about 11 foot long, and he's standing about 2 foot from the nose, and the waves and the board's sticking straight out. It wasn't sitting on the face, it would stand up. And I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, I wonder what's causing that. And he couldn't get it, he couldn't get the board to sit on the face of the wave. Eventually, after, quite a while, thought about it, and in an offshore wind on a big wave, there's a lot of updraft up the face. So the board didn't offer any resistance. It just kept lifting and lifting and lifting, and then it got onto the tail rocker, and you were riding about the last 12 inches of an 11 foot board. So the next boards I made him, I straightened the tail out, sat straight on the face and stayed on the wave a lot better. So rocker's good for doing a quicker turn. It lacks drive, and then if you're riding big waves, which is one of the things I see now in big wave surfing, I think it was at Jaws, and nobody was making a wave. They'd take off and just fall out of the lip, and it was because they got fins were about 2 foot from the tail. They had tail rocker and hard edges. Those three things are a disaster in big waves, in my opinion. You need a flatter tail, a softer rail, and the fin towards the back of the board. When I was looking at it, I started laughing and thinking, God, maybe I should go to Hawaii and offer to make some guns for these guys.
Decent ones.
But anyway, I decided it's not worth it. I'd rather laugh at them.
So this photo I took of Geoff and Mirko at Broken Head. And you met Mirko in Japan?
I did. When I used to have boards made in Japan, I met her when I went over there to shape some boards one time.
Was she already riding McCoys?
No, she actually wasn't even surfing. When she was younger, she started surfing, and she got hit in the eye by a board, and it nearly took her eye out, and the mother told her couldn't surf no more. But when she met me, she wasn't surfing, and she came to Australia, and I think I got a bodyboard for her to get in the water, and then I talked her into getting a surfboard, and I made her a 6'8" AllRound Nugget, and she had trouble paddling it. She couldn't catch waves easy. So one day we were at Broken, and I said, have a go on my board, which was 8 foot. And she paddled straight on and stood up and started riding it. Well, that's probably 28 years ago. And since then she's ridden 8 foot boards all the time. Bit narrower in the nose, and still thick, still 3 1/4 inches thick. And she catches waves easy and rides them quite competently. Anyway, she's now a surfer again.
And she's a big part of the business.
Oh, well, yeah, she does all the book work, as well as looking after me, washing, cooking, cleaning, does all the book work. She couldn't hardly speak English when she came, but...
Came to Australia?
Yeah, in 1991 she first came to Australia. Anyway, she learned how to speak English, read it and write it, and then she does all the book work now. I mean, it's only been the two of us really for years, just doing everything. And
well,
worked out.
In my opinion, over all the different facets from Brookvale to Boca, Coffs Harbour, Hawaii, Japan, Byron Bay, this is the best production and the most consistency out of the whole McCoy era since you've been shaping.
Well, the most production was in Brookvale.
You had a few different shapers helping you? Or?
Yeah. And then when I went from Brookvale to the Central Coast of Boca Beach, I reduced the number of boards we were producing, and I had 3 or 4 other shapers working still. We used to do 30 boards a week.
Did you draw out the plan shapes and all that, or you taught them how to and they could work it out themselves? Or?
No, I taught them what to do, but they
with your designs.
Yeah, and then they shaped them. But I had a guy called Skip Leafield who worked with me for many years. He was the main shaper. He was a Californian guy. I met him at Angari when he was cruising around Australia with his mate, and somehow or other he ended up staying and working with me as a sander, and then got him into the shaping, and he became the main backup shaper for many years. Then there was other guys, Eric Taylor in the Boca Beach. Eric shaped he's actually lives in Turos Heads now, and he still shapes boards for himself. Matt McDermott, who still lives at Copacabana, he makes boards still in the Central Coast. And Tony Wright. Tony Wright was one of those early day world traveller surfers. He'd been all over the place and that. An artist really, quite a good shaper. So those 4 guys over the time, the 15 years I was in Avoca, those 4 guys backed up the shaping in different times.
Because you had McCoy, Barry Capuni, what's his name? Barry BK.
Oh, Barry. Well, see.
Kanaiapuni.
Barry Kanaiapuni.
Reno
Abalira. Geoff Hackman and Sean Thompson. I made models for them.
And Larry Blair models too?
Yeah, well, we made Larry Blair models and
Shane Horan models.
Shane Horan, Mark Warren.
Oh my God.
There was quite a few.
That's why you needed so many guys.
Yeah. But the Avoca Beach was, in my opinion, were the golden years of my involvement in surfing. It was pretty